obviously more casual Saturday here. And starting the Middle Ages, we talked last time. We closed up the last section talking about how the decline of the Western Empire led to the European Middle Ages, and some of the reasons for that was the lack of stability of the Western Empire. With the lack of the Western Empire, the disintegration of the Western Empire, the lack of stability. And so the wealthy landowners needed people to, in order to feel stable, in order to maintain as much of a status quo as possible. So you're talking about, building walls around the outside of their lands, and at the center, building a stone structure, a castle at the center. And so that's all part and parcel. Okay, but the people that would live within the manor, within the estate, would essentially be, for lack of a better word, peasants or indentured servants, if you will, and they'd be expected to work the land. And so as the people would work the land, they came to several discoveries when it comes to farming, and that is the importance of crop rotation. And during the Middle Ages, they discovered that you can't grow the same crop on the same field year after year after year, because it depletes the same nutrients out of the soil, and eventually the soil just turns into just not fertile. It just becomes not fertile soil and not good for growing any crops. And so they understood the ideas of crop rotation, that, okay, one year I can grow wheat on this field, and then I'll have to grow some kind of barley on this field, but I'll always leave one field open to sort of recoup all of its nutrients. They call it fallow. And so it would always kind of be this three-way rotation, maybe, again, wheat and barley more than likely, but wheat, barley, and then a fallow in order to make sure that there would be enough nutrients. And so with that, food supplies and foodstuffs increase significantly. And if you foster efficiency, you don't need then as many people in order to work the fields. And so that enabled people to go out and seek other professions, other things to do, other things to kind of fill their time. And so this led to the formation of craft guilds, which is the early formation of the university system. In fact, guild means university, or university means guild, so on and so forth. And so essentially what had happened was, as people no longer had to farm, okay, then as a young, we're talking usually men here, because it was somewhat of a man's world at that time, or so the men thought, right? At a young age, you would be what was referred to as an apprentice, where you would study under a master and kind of learn some of the ways of the master, of a craftsman, of an artisan of some sort, and so the rise of artisans in this sense. And so you would be an apprentice for a period of time. And then by the time you got to maybe your 15th, 16th birthday, or 15, 16 years old, maybe you're 10 years under a master, then you would kind of venture out onto your own and start doing some of your own work, but still you would not be considered a master, you'd be considered what's called a journeyman. And so you'd be a journeyman for a period of time until you created what was known as a masterpiece, and at that time you would then be considered a master. So you can kind of see this progression, how initially the craft guilds were set aside for artisans, people that would work with their hands, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, whatever you want to call them, and how that would then segue into the university system. And because the university system is set up very much the same way. And so that then led to the creation of centers of learning, and which from there led to expansion of literature altogether. But the only problem was that the only literature that could be found, they were all written in Latin. And if you lived in England, because this also coincides with the rise of nation states, which we'll talk about in another lecture. But if you lived in England, and you were somewhat of an average Joe, if you were a journeyman, or even if you were a master, you couldn't more than likely read Latin or even understand Latin. And so this led to the expansion of vernacular literature. Vernacular is simply the commonly spoken language within a certain group or society. So in England, vernacular is English. In France, vernacular is French, so on and so forth. And so the expansion of vernacular literature. And one of the earlier vernacular books that really caught the fancy of the masses was by Geoffrey Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, and then also Dante's Inferno. I'm sorry, the Divine Comedies, the Inferno being one of them by Dante. It's more in the Italian realm. But again, the expansion of vernacular literature and just the expansion of literature, the expansion of learning altogether. Again, it starts with the fields, understanding crop rotation, improving crops, and improving outputs to the point where you don't need as many farmers. You don't need as many farmers. People can spend more time on developing a craft, developing an artisan craft of some sort. That leads to apprentice to journeyman to master in the craft guilds, and the craft guilds then segued into the university system, which led to the expansion of literature, particularly vernacular literature. Okay, and so that's kind of the natural progression of things within medieval society. Okay. Next lecture we'll talk about within the centers of learning themselves, who often ran these centers of learning, and that was the Catholic Church. So we'll talk about the order of monks, the Dominicans and the Franciscans, and what all that meant. Okay, we'll see you next time.